So, have any of you gone to CBC Geography to take a virtual field trip down to Mammoth Springs? I uploaded 2 videos. Went all the way to Mammoth Springs and took some videos so you could see what Mammoth Springs looks like. It's on CBC Geography, that Twitter account. Just go check it out and tell me what you think about it from the last chapter. We're on page 250, talking about looking at a map of the world and the official languages of these countries of the world. And let's just take the chart on page 251. And English is spoken in Australia, and where else? What other countries have that light green color? Zambia, Botswana, Namibia, Nigeria, Liberia, Sierra Leone. What are these countries doing in Africa?
They don't actually speak like an English like we speak. They speak more of a slang English, and it's harder to understand.
And their English is derived more from England than it is from us. But why would English be their official language in these countries? Anybody have any ideas? What did we say one time about, have you heard that phrase, the sun never sets on the British Empire? Because England, Britain, had colonies all around the globe, so that no matter where you were, the sun was always shining on a colony of the British Empire. Wasn't there a British colony in the United States at one time? Wasn't there? Then how come they packed up and left? Do we have a British colony in the United States anymore? What happened with the relationship of the here we speak English over the whole country. What happened to our relationship with England? Why do we speak English? Why is English our official language?
Because we were pilgrims from the British colony, but we wanted to break off from the British government.
So we were a British colony and we were pilgrims from Britain, but some of the people who came here didn't like the way things were being done in Britain. They came here for religious freedom and some other freedoms as well. And then when the British tried to tell the early settlers in America what they had to do and how they had to live, and I think they started making them pay taxes on the favorite drink of the English. Tea. And what did we have in Boston? A tea party. And what did we do? What did our early ancestors do in Boston at that tea party?
Dump all the tea out.
They dumped it all in the bay, in the ocean, because they were mad about being charged taxes. And eventually, we declared our independence from England, like a whole bunch of other countries, but we kept English as our official language. I mean, you remember when we talked about the Louisiana Purchase? How much of the United States we purchased from where? What country?
France.
France. can you see how it would have been very easy for French to become the official language of the United States? When we bought the Louisiana Purchase, we would say, you know, that's a major part of our country. Why don't we just, out of admiration for the French, why don't we just make French our official language instead of English? Because we had stronger ties to England, so we kept English as our official language. Or in the Southwest, where a lot of the United States at one time was under control of Mexico, in a sense, this country could be a country with 3 official languages. English for the countries in the East, French for the countries in the Midwest from the Louisiana Purchase, and Spanish for countries for states on the West Coast where originally it came from Mexico. But that hasn't happened, has it? Did any of you study French or Spanish in school? What did you study? What languages have you studied?
French, Spanish, and Portuguese.
What?
French, Spanish, and Portuguese.
Because you've traveled around the world, you've studied French, Spanish, and Portuguese?
Studied a little bit of Spanish.
A little Spanish?
And Japanese, a little bit.
Anybody else study any foreign languages?
Japanese and Arabic, or Spanish and Arabic and a little Japanese.
Spanish and Arabic and a little
Japanese.
Japanese?
Portuguese and French.
Portuguese and French?
I've studied English.
English? I studied English, and your native language is?
Spanish.
Spanish? Wouldn't that be nice if 1/3 of America had Spanish as their official language? Wouldn't that just be so much fun, Carla?
Pretty close.
Yeah, probably.
Or it would probably be, though, more like Mexican Spanish, wouldn't it, than the Spanish you're familiar with?
Yeah.
My Spanish?
Uh-huh.
No, it's not extremely different. It's the same language, but we have different words and different accents and
Yeah,
stuff.
different dialects, just like we do in the English language.
Yeah.
So, why is English in Australia?
Because that's where the British sent all their prisoners and bad
How
guys.
do you get rid of the criminal element? Put them on a boat and ship them to Australia. Pull into the harbor, set them loose, and get out of there as quick as you can. And say, hope you guys have a nice day. If you can survive, we'll be back to get you when your sentence is over. So, move down to French. Where is French considered an official language? A whole bunch of western part of Africa.
Well, they don't speak the proper French. They speak a French slang.
But why is French their official language? Because they used to be French colonies. It makes sense that France and Europe would be French. What's this Canada thing? How come Canada is striped?
Because it's a mixture of both languages.
What's
Or
that
they
all
speak
about? I thought Canada was English like we are. No,
French Canadian.
French Canadian. The French had a huge settlement in Canada and have had a long-term influence there, haven't they? Yes?
I don't know what they're talking about.
A boot? Talking a boot?
Hey.
So basically it's striped because in Canada, English and French are both official languages, aren't they? But what's the national language? French, isn't it? In Canada? That's their heritage. I think even one of the, someplace, it might have been Quebec, that was going to declare French could be the only language that could be spoken. Okay, Spanish, purple, Mexico, Central America, northwest part of South America and Argentina and Uruguay. How come all of South America doesn't speak Spanish?
Because a lot of it's Portuguese.
Where did Portuguese come from?
Portugal.
Brazil speaks Portuguese. And see Portugal, where Portuguese originated? Spain had a lot of colonies in Central America and South America. Portugal had the eastern part of South America, Brazil, and it looks like Portugal also had an influence in Africa, in Angola, and looks like around on the other side in, what is that? Mozambique? What about Chinese? Well, it looks like that Great Wall had a profound effect, didn't it? They built a Great Wall around China to do what?
Protect from invaders.
To keep people out. And so what did it end up doing? Keeping the Chinese language confined to China. Turkic? Where is that? Does that mean that probably Turkey had colonized Kazakhstan and what's those others up there? Uzbekistan and what's another one? Turkmenistan. Arabic. I can see them speaking Arabic in Saudi Arabia, but how come so much of Africa speaks Arabic? Did the Arabs colonize too?
Muslims do.
It's mainly Muslims in the area, and Muslim speaks Arabic. So.
And then other. Boy, what's all this other? Look at all those little, look at all that other. And see the list. That's that kind of gray part. So, Iran is 15, they speak Persian. Afghanistan is 15 and 16. They speak Persian and Pashto. Pakistan, what number is Pakistan?
I don't have a number.
Well, what language do they speak? What else? Mongolia, what do they speak? You don't know? What language do they speak in Mongolia? What?
What?
Huh. What language do they speak in Mongolia?
Mongolian.
Mongolian. What language do they speak in Russia?
Russian.
Russian. What language do they speak in Finland? Finnish. What language do they speak in Sweden?
Swedish.
Swedish. What language do they speak in Norway?
Norwegian.
Norwegian. What language do they speak in Poland? Polish. So there's a whole lot of smaller languages. What language do they speak in Ethiopia? You don't know? What language do they speak in ETHO? What language do they speak in Ethiopia?
Can't see.
Amharic? And in Somalia?
Ethiopian.
Somali? In Malaysia? Any idea? Does it have a number by it?
Malay.
They speak Malays. In Thailand? 23. So they speak Thai. In Myanmar? 22. They speak Burmese. There are a lot of languages around the globe. But which ones seem to be the most prominent? Do you know why the French, if you travel to France and you go into some middle class restaurant to order something to eat and you speak English, they will act like they don't understand what you're saying. When all of the middle class Frenchmen are fluent in English. But they do it to spite us because we don't know French. And that bothers them because French used to be the business language of the world, and France used to be the country where people went to get an education. And what happened? The United States came along and upstaged France. One time France and the United States got so upset with each other that they quit serving French fries in the cafeteria in Congress because they were mad at France about something they had said or done toward America. So understand that English, even in China, people learn English. Why? Because they just have so much respect for the United States and England? No, because they want to do business with the rest of the world, and the business language of the world today is English. And most of that is driven by the United States. And here's what really happens. People who don't like the United States often will be able to speak and understand English, but they won't use it because they don't like us. But our language is the business language of the world because America seems to be the driving force in global business today. Okay, enough of this page. Let's turn over here and look at this chart about Proto-Indo on page 252, Proto-Indo-European languages. And that's the one where somebody said, is English? I thought English was Latin. And I just Googled, is English Latin? And it said, no, it's a Germanic language. Now, so look at the Indo-European family of languages, and it basically tells you that if you look across the top, you see Germanic and Balto-Slavic and Latin and Celtic and Classical Greek and Indo-Iranian. You follow the main categories there? Germanic, Balto-Slavic, Latin, Celtic, Classical Greek, and Indo-Iranian. You go, well, wait a minute. What about Armenian and Albanian? Well, they're kind of two standalones. You see what happens? They don't grow out of one of the other languages. They're kind of standalone languages. And can you see where if the people in Armenia and Albania, if their languages are pure Proto-Indo-European languages, do you see why they're going to be reluctant to give those up? They're going to hold on to them because of their history and their culture and their lineage. And just like when someone said, well, don't we have a strong connection with Latin? Yes, the internet says. We get a lot of our stuff from Latin because a lot of our words, what are some of our words that come from French and Spanish? Well, maybe French. Probably a lot of words from French, aren't there? And that's from that Latin origin. But there's a picture on page 252 of one language family. Look at page 253. Other language families. And what's that light green that covers all of North and South America? Or light blue. What color is that? Which one is that?
Indo-European.
Indo-European. That's another whole language group. Indo-European. I wonder what happens if we just type that in here. I-N-D, Indo, how did they spell it? Just Indo, where to go? Hyphen, European. Indo-European languages. Let's see if that gives us. Indo-European languages chart. See if we can find a chart. Let's see what Wikipedia tells us. Well, it doesn't show a chart, but look what it does show here. What are the subdivisions of Indo-European? Albanian, Armenian, Balto-Slavic, Celtic, Germanic. Looks like in Eurasia, and it shows a picture of them. Well, what's that? What, dark red stuff up in Canada? Or not dark. What color is that up there?
I think it's Na-Dene.
Na-Dene? Na-Dene. Let's type in Na-Dene and see what we find. Did you see where it said Baltic, connection to Baltic? Here's a picture of it right here. North America, and a little bit of it down there. What's that? What's that sandy colored stuff in South America? Amarind, A-M-E-R-I-N-D. And what's that stuff in North Africa? Afro-Asiatic? That's kind of a mix of African and Asian. And what's that dark green? Congolese? Niger Congolese? Well, page 254 talks about the geography of writing. So what kind of penmanship do you use? Is your penmanship listed here? Orthography? Where did we get our letters? Does anyone know where we got our numeral system? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10?
Is it?
Hindu Arabic. It's a blend of Hindu and Arabic. Say, what system were we using before that? The Roman system. You would not want to be doing all of your math in Roman numerals.
That is so true. That would take way too long.
I mean, if you like grew up doing it, it wouldn't take that
That's
long,
true.
but-
It would take forever.
What do you call
On page 255, it shows a distribution of the alphabetic scripts in Eurasia. Where you find these alphabetic scripts that are listed over here? Well, some of them. Isn't that interesting? Here's Arabic, and then what's that purple? Georgian, and then that little red piece right in the middle? Armenian. And then Roman. Right? I guess that Georgian is right north of Armenia in Georgia. And then all that other stuff is Roman influence. The Roman alphabet. Well, page 256. Politics changes place names.
Blush.
Has politics changed any names of places where you've ever lived? Well, my grandchildren lived in Russia for a while, and what is now St. Petersburg at one time was called Leningrad. And why was it called Leningrad? Under communism, they named it after Lenin. Why is it called St. Petersburg? Because it was a city named after St. Peter. And when communism took over and turned all the churches into warehouses or theaters and outlawed the Bible and religion, basically relegated it to non-existence. But even though the official position in Russia was atheism, did Christianity still thrive in Russia under communism? Yes, it did. And I don't know if any of you would, do you know anything about the history of China, where there used to be a bunch of missionaries in China, and those missionaries were kicked out of China, and they were worried about what was going to happen to the Chinese Christians when all the Christian missionaries were kicked out. And quite a few years later, they went back to China and discovered a thriving population of Christian people, which I think is encouraging to know that even when official countries say no more Christianity allowed, Christianity thrives anyway. Anybody here from Minnesota? Nobody's here from Minnesota. Well, I'm sorry they didn't put your state in here. Why would there be a place in Minnesota called Warsaw and New Prague? Any idea? And Odessa. There's an Odessa, Missouri. Where does this Odessa come from? Well, let's check that one out. Let's just go back and where did the city name Odessa come from? Odessa, a Ukrainian port city that sits on the north coast of the Black Sea, was given its name by Russia's Catherine the Great, who was inspired by Homer's Odyssey. Odessa, Texas, named from railroad workers who claimed it reminded them of the Odessa region in the south of Russia. So, Odessa, Missouri, where do you think Odessa, Missouri got their name? From Ukrainian immigrants. Where do you think Odessa, Minnesota got their name? From Ukrainian immigrants. Page 257. Have any of you ever seen a copy of Luther's German Bible? Well, if you ever get a chance to travel to Germany, be sure and visit Martin Luther's museum, where they have all of these books. And I couldn't understand the lady leading the tour because I didn't understand German, but I sure enjoyed looking around at the sites. Some years ago, I decided, since I've been teaching here so long, that I would go visit Calvary alumni who were missionaries in Europe. Now, you have to understand, okay, I'm a bargain hunter, and it just happened that you could buy a U-Rail pass. EURORAIL. All of Europe is crisscrossed with railroads, and I could buy a pass that would let me travel on any of those railroads, like I think for up to 30 days, for I think it was like $300. So all I had to do was fly to Europe and get on the trains, and for 30 days I could travel all over a whole bunch of countries visiting Calvary alumni. And in the process of doing that, I stopped in a few cities and looked at some things that I wanted to see, and one of them was the Lutheran Museum in Germany, and it was really cool. But it was fun to visit all those missionaries and learn things about what was going on and the work they were doing. And I also had to go to France and visit what I thought was the home of my ancestors in a part of France called Pau, P-A-U. But that Martin Luther did us a real favor. I don't know if we realize how much, so often when we think about Germany in America, the United States, don't we think about the war we had with Hitler? And that's for sure, that was a real thing that went on. But prior to Hitler, the German Bible was just a real contribution to the world. On page 258, it talks about how English has risen. Can you see where Latin served as a language of religion, scholarship, and some diplomacy in Europe after the Roman Empire? In the 19th century, French was the language of culture and diplomacy. Today, English has quickly become the global lingua franca, the global language of travelers, of learned people, of education. How did English acquire this status today? Well, English speakers spread around the world as part of the British Empire. 2, English remained the language of government, commerce, and education in some of the world's most populous countries, even after they were freed from British rule. Some of them forced the British out, and others, the British just said, hey, you can run your own country now. 3rd, since World War II, the political and economic power of the United States has helped to increase the use of English in global science and business activities. So that's how English has become so powerful. In 2006, in the 1970s, no, let's see. In 2006, French President Jacques Chirac stormed out of an international meeting at which a French business executive said, "I will speak English, the language of business." And the president of France, how dare a French businessman stand up and speak in English instead of French? The French president was so offended he got up and stormed out of the meeting. In 2003, Mahathir Mohamad, who'd become prime minister, reintroduced English for teaching all math and science classes, saying, "We have to accept English whether we like it or not." Over 90% of secondary school students in the European Union's non-English speaking countries study English, whereas only 33% study French and 13% study German. Chile wants all school children to be proficient in English. Why would a country want their children to be proficient in English? Because it prepares them to be the business leaders in their communities. Well, enough of that. I don't know if any of you remember the Kosovo, Serbia stuff and Albania stuff that happened in the early 2000s. Where were you in 2008? 11 years ago? You probably weren't following this stuff, were you?
I was 6.
I was like 5. I think I was 8 or 9.
Well, can you understand
10.
that each of these places had their own language, and once and at one time, when it became Czechoslovakia, they tried to do away with the separate language groups, and they ended up having a terrible war over there. They all kind of brought their own language groups back again. Language is a powerful thing that holds people together. Portuguese, a little country of Portugal, develops a relationship with a country called Brazil, and all of Brazil speaks Portuguese. Even if the Portuguese in Brazil is a little different dialect than the Portuguese in Portugal, the languages of Africa and figure 7.2, which we saw earlier, shows that most of the official languages in Africa are the languages of the former European rulers. But this map reveals major language groups and a sampling of the extraordinary number of native languages in Africa. Which one seems to be the most prominent? Bantu and Semitic, Hamitic, page 262. Language in the United States. A picture of dialect regions. Northern, Midland, and Southern American English were already developed in the 18th century, and as pioneers headed west, they took their dialect with them. Northern, Midland, and Southern. What do people call tea in the north? What do people in the south call it?
Tea.
Southern sweet tea.
Well,
Sweet tea. Should American English be the official national language of America?
yes.
Because
Because everybody has something or wants something from us.
if the rest of the world says English is the business language of the world, then what would be the official business language for America? English. I mean, let's face it. If you live in the Southwest, it would make sense to learn Spanish, wouldn't it? Just to communicate with Spanish-speaking people. But if you're a Spanish speaker, if you want to connect with the business community and do business in America, you need to learn English. And I think it's great. In fact, if you're proficient in English and Spanish, you can get a job teaching in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico very easily, because they have a lot of children who come to school from Spanish-speaking homes who maybe don't know English very well. And the idea is that they will learn better if you speak their native tongue while teaching them how to be conversant in English. Instead of just throwing them in and saying you have to learn English and I don't want to hear any Spanish in here. It's like, no, we can communicate in Spanish, but we develop our bilingual skills. We develop our English skills because that's the language for going to college, that's the language for business, that's the language of the world. So it makes sense to make English our official language and make sure that if a student's going to be prepared for options to be successful in the future, I say if you're going to prepare students to walk through a number of doors in life occupationally, then you better make sure that they're proficient in English, whether you like English or not. Page 264, the second part of this chapter talks about the world's major religions. So let's just look over here on page 265. And let's look at this picture. Picture's worth 1,000 words. It looks like that Roman Catholic is mentioned first. And where do you see Roman Catholic? Now, I'm looking at the United States, and it looks like we are surrounded by Roman Catholics. We have Catholics to the north of us and Roman Catholics to the south of us. Did you know that? That Canada is a Roman Catholic country? I mean, there are Protestants up there, and there are Eastern Orthodox up there, and there are Muslims up there, and Buddhists, and Jewish people, and Hindus, and animists. But Roman Catholic is the dominant religion in Canada. And what's the dominant religion in the United States?
Christianity.
Protestant. Did you know that? Have any of you ever driven to a little town and noticed that there's a big Catholic church with a little school built next to the church? Why would the Catholics have their own schools when they came here to America? Have you looked at early American textbooks and what those textbooks say about the Roman Catholic Church? Do you have any idea what the history of Protestant America says about the Roman Catholic Church? I mean, my ancestors in France were told to leave the country or go to work on a ship. Before they had steam engines to make them go, they put people down in the bottom of the ship with an oar, moving it around. And they said, we're tired of you Huguenots, you Protestants in France. We're officially a Catholic country. It's time for you to leave. And so my ancestors left. Now, can you understand if one of my ancestors was a teacher in early America, what he would say about Roman Catholicism in his classroom? And the textbooks, the early American textbooks reflect that we were not friendly toward Roman Catholics. So, we were tolerant of them because that's part of America, is you tolerate other people. So that means if they come here and they want to practice Roman Catholicism, you let them build a church, you let them build a school, and they send their kids to that school. Most often, they would send them to that school up through 8th grade, and then they would send them to the Protestant high school because they said they have to learn how to live and work in a Protestant society because that's what we are in this country. I mean, are there some people who want to deny that we have a Protestant history? In fact, in America, we have a work ethic. And does anyone know that work ethic is called the Protestant work ethic? Does anyone know what the Bible says to a Protestant about working? Do your work as what? Unto the Lord? And submit to those over you as God's overseers. That's why Protestants make such good employees. They're honest, hardworking, and they do what they're told. Say, well, why aren't Roman Catholics that way? Well, Roman Catholics are not encouraged officially to read the Bible. They're basically told by the parish priest, if you want to know what the Bible says about something, come and ask me and I will tell you. And what is Canada? French, Canadian, so that makes them officially Roman Catholic. And you say, what about South and Central America? Well, what about Central America, Mexico and Central America? Well, when those, okay, look over at Europe. Okay, what religion is Portugal, Spain, Germany, Italy, France? Well, France, Spain, Portugal, and Italy, what religion are they? Roman Catholic. So that means when they established a colony somewhere, they built Roman Catholic churches and Roman Catholic traditions. And it still has a lasting effect today. And what about South America? Okay, what have we done here? It's got two colors going through it. Roman Catholic and Protestant. And both are there. Do any of you know any missionaries in South America? Have they told you stories about...
My cousins actually live in Ecuador as missionaries.
And have they talked about what kind of relationship they have with the local Catholic priest?
Very briefly. I think I don't remember.
Does the priest encourage his parishioners to go to Protestant church meetings? What do you think? If he's a faithful Roman Catholic priest. In fact, a friend of mine, when we graduated from Calvary here years ago, he went to Brazil as a missionary, and the Catholic priest spread all kinds of rumors about him, that don't let your children go to his church meetings because he kidnaps children and sells them as slaves. He eats children for lunch. And they would even have people go by and say nasty things to them in Portuguese, but they didn't always understand it because they didn't learn nasty words in Portuguese school, but they would throw rocks through their windows. Things have changed. They're a little more civilized now because we're more of a global society, but there's still a lot of Catholic discrimination against Protestants. But does this surprise you? In Protestant countries, there's been a lot of discrimination against Catholics. When John F. Kennedy ran for president, that was one of the biggest concerns that some people had, was if he's elected, he'll be the first Roman Catholic president. And it didn't do any serious damage to America. So what about the bottom of page 265, where it talks about how many people are Christians? And it looks like 2.2 million. No, 2.2 billion. Put 3 more zeros at the end of that. 2.2 billion. But out of those Christians, notice how this book divides up Christians. Roman Catholics, Independents, Protestants, Orthodox, and Anglicans. So half of those 2.2 billion Christians are Roman Catholics, which means the other half are all of these other things. So, fellow Protestant, there's only 385 million of us in the world. Is that okay with you? We're outnumbered by Roman Catholics by about 4 to 1. You know anything about, do any of you know any Orthodox Christians? Have you ever seen a church called Orthodox Christian Church? Often it's called Eastern Orthodox because Russian immigrants who came here were members of the Eastern Orthodox Church and they brought that with them. Anglicans. How many Buddhists are there? 384 million. About as many Buddhists as there are Protestants. How many Hindus? About twice as many Hindus. Have any of you been to a Buddhist country? Have any of you been to a Hindu country? About twice as many Hindus as there are Buddhists and Protestants. Jewish? 15 million? Boy, for only being 15 million, they sure get a lot of publicity, don't they? Muslims? 1.4 billion? So when the Muslims and the Christians had wars going on years ago, were those wars between the Muslims and the Protestants or between the Muslims and the Catholics? Anyone know? If it would have been between the Muslims and the Protestants, we would have lost. It was between the Muslims and the Catholics. And they're about equally matched in numbers. So, this to me is a little bit humorous. 15 million Jews are a threat to 1.4 billion Muslims in the Middle East. Those 15 million Jews, and all of them don't live in, how many of them live in Europe? How many of them live in Asia? Where that little pocket of Jews is there. 5 million? How can 5 million Jews be a threat to 992 million Muslims in the Middle East, in Asia? Does anyone know how 5 million Jews could be a threat to all those Muslims? Does anyone know what happened a few years ago when some of those Muslims got together and decided that it was time to drive the Jewish nation into the Mediterranean Sea and wipe them out and take over their holy land and divide it up amongst ourselves again? Does anyone know what happened? That 5-day war when Egypt and some of their fellow Arab nations decided to attack Israel. Israel won the war, drove them out of some of the territory that they occupied and took it over. And then gave it back to them and said, we don't want all this, we just want our little piece of real estate. Now please leave us alone. And are the surrounding Arab nations leaving Israel alone? No. What is going on here? Why would Muslims be so antagonistic toward Jewish people? Why would that be? Anyone know? I mean, on page 267 is a picture of that little country of Israel, that little nation. And what do Jews and Christians and Muslims all have in common? Who do the Muslims identify as their religious hero? What? Muhammad. And who do the Jews identify as their religious hero?
Moses.
Not Jesus. Abraham, don't they? And who do Christians identify as their religious hero?
Jesus.
Jesus, who was Jewish. And the book talks about how Judaism, it talks about that war in 1967 on page 266, right-hand column. And it talks about the connections. This book talks about the connections between Judaism and Christianity on page 269. And let's see, then where do they talk about? And Islam on page 274. And they talk about all three of these having this common origin. Okay, so the Jews look at Abraham as a religious hero. What's our relationship to Abraham? Do any of you know anything about our connection to Abraham? Abraham and Isaac. You know anything about that Old Testament? Have you had Old Testament survey yet? Well, when you take it, have you had Old Testament survey? So you know our connection to Abraham and Isaac? Does anyone know how Muslims connect to Abraham? Abraham's wife couldn't have a baby. So, do you remember reading this in your Old Testament? So, Sarah gave one of her handmaids to Abraham to have children with. What was that handmaid's name? Hagar. And she had a son. And guess what? That son is the grandfather of the Muslim nation. So, do you understand how people who study religion, historians, they look at Jews, Christians, and Muslims all having this same common connection, but they don't get along with each other. They just seem to have an animosity toward one another. And the book says something on page 268 that I wrote down here. Yeah, I put a little question mark by it. On page 268, religious fundamentalism and political terrorism. Now, to give the book credit, it says in the middle of the left-hand column, fundamentalism has led people to extraordinary acts of both good and evil. So, fundamental beliefs have resulted in a lot of good things as well as a lot of evil things. So it's not all good, it's not all evil. But if you go down to the last paragraph on the left-hand column, the use of religion, the Christian Gospels teach peace, love, and forgiveness. Now, what does the Christian gospel teach? What is the gospel? When Paul said, I preach the gospel to you, what was he preaching? That Christ did what?
Died on the cross.
Died on the cross and was buried and rose again the third day. That's the gospel. So how come they said the Christian gospel is peace, love, and forgiveness? Well, if they told us, if they put in this book what the gospel really is, this book would be spreading the gospel all over campuses all over America. So the guys who wrote the book either don't understand the Christian gospel or they deliberately watered it down for the sake of a book that would be acceptable everywhere. Because if you said the Christian gospel is that there's only one way to heaven, and that's through a relationship with Jesus Christ, that would offend a whole bunch of the other two major religions that are talked about here in this chapter, Jews and Muslims. But look what it says next. Christianity has arguably has a worse history of persecution than Islam does. And I said up here, I actually Googled. Let me turn this back on. Let's see. Let's just type who persecutes more, Christians or Muslims? Did you mean who persecuted more, Christians or Muslims? Sure, let's see what that says. 11 Christians. Muslims converting to Christianity. What happens when a Muslim converts to Christianity in a Muslim country and he announces his conversion?
He gets killed.
He just dies. Christians are the most persecuted religion in the world. When a Muslim becomes a Christian, are Muslims more persecuted than Christians? It doesn't matter how I say it. What do I find on Google?
Christians are the most persecuted.
So, if this guy would have Googled this statement before he wrote this, he would say, Christianity arguably has been persecuted more than Islam, right? In other words, who does more persecuting, Christians or Muslims? And the answer is Muslims. So why does he say it this way? Why would he say this? Does he not know what Google is telling us? Does he not know history? I mean, if you just Google, even if you take the Roman Catholic Church, say, okay, the Roman Catholic Church had a lot of wars. Okay, just Google Roman Catholic wars and then Google Muslim wars and see what shows up. I mean, you will find a ton of stuff where Muslims swing the sword in the name of Allah. And they're pretty quick to do deadly things with it. So just make a note here in your book that on page 268, for some reason, the author of our book decided to say Christians persecute others more than Muslims do. And even if you looked at it this way, if there's 4 times as many Muslims in the world as there are Christians, you can pretty well figure that Muslims are doing more persecution because there's more of them, and they outnumber the Christians. Now, it isn't that Christians haven't done their share of persecution. I think, haven't all of you had stories in your history books about Christian persecution in early America? how they would have the Salem witch trials. I even remember studying that when I was in grade school. Did they also tell us about all the good things that some of those Christians were doing in early America? No, they just wanted us to know that the Christians were persecuting people that they perceived to be witches. I don't know if you know this or not, but early Americans were known. The reason America became such a leading country in the world is because learning to read and being literate is a requirement for going to school and college and university and business. In early America, everybody, before we had schools, everybody who had a Protestant heritage taught their children how to read. Does anyone know why Protestants would want their children to know how to read?
For the Bible.
So they can read the Bible. And the Bible is the primary textbook. Does anyone know who wrote the first dictionary of American English words? Noah Webster. And guess where he got most of his definitions for his words?
The Bible.
Out of the Bible. We're a country that was built on the notion that we want our children to be able to read so that they can read the Bible and properly relate to their Creator God. And yet, so much of our own history points out that they don't point out the good things that our Protestant beliefs have done for us. Our Protestant work ethic, our teaching children how to read so they can read the Bible, wanting them to read. I don't know if you probably don't remember this. When I was a teenager, there was no place to go in town on Sunday morning except to church because all the stores were closed. Why would all the stores be closed on Sunday morning? So all the employees could go to church. Who does that today? Who today closes their store on Sunday? What?
Chick-fil-A.
Thank you very much. Chick-fil-A. There's one. And Chick-fil-A, I think he's the only one I know. Or does Hobby Lobby do it?
Mm-hmm.
Are they closed on Sunday morning?
I think so.
So Chick-fil-A is the only fast food place doing it. So what are some people saying about Chick-fil-A now? You can't open a Chick-fil-A in our airport because of your religious beliefs. You can't open a Chick-fil-A in our town, in our mall, because of your religious beliefs. Do they have a religious belief test for anybody else? I mean, a Muslim opens up a restaurant and he puts a sign up that says, I embrace Sharia law. You know what? If he embraces Sharia law, he's going to do if you steal something from his store?
Kill you.
If it's the second or third time, the first time he'll just cut your hand off. If you do it twice, he'll cut your foot off. The third time, he'll kill you. I mean, that's what Sharia law tells him to do. Seems to me like if you're going to blacklist a restaurant, Chick-fil-A is not the first one you ought to be looking at.
That doesn't really work. Woman goes in there.
Well, we'll talk about this stuff some more on Wednesday. No, we have to finish this up on Wednesday. Okay. So that's what we'll do. We'll finish it up on Wednesday.